if we want to put DfAM to work, as I've phrased it, we at some point we're going to have to certify, validate, qualify our parts. And I think it's pretty sure, we should all be pretty sure in the room that certification is needed. But to address some of these challenges and to try and break down some of these barriers, it's quite important for us to just bear in mind that at some point industry wants to use our knowledge, it wants to be able to apply our research, and I think it's relatively well defined in terms of the geometric research, the material and the process research individually, and also in terms of industrially, they're relatively well-known processes. The barrier seems to come with industry and the certification / qualification debate, regardless of which industrial sector you're in, when we start to add complex combinations where we add a new geometry and a new material, or we have alternative materials, processes, etc., etc. And the reality is because an end product, unlike parts of our research, are under different forms of pressures. If you think about this as an aircraft or a vehicle in particular, we're looking for increasing max takeoff weights, longer range, lower fuel burn, decreasing empty weights, so that we're more efficient with our land, sea, or air vehicles. And in all cases, what we have to do is we put more stress on our airframe, our chassis, our vehicle in some way, shape, or form. And to do that, we quite often will lower the reserve factor. We'll give ourselves less meat on the bones. When we have a low reserve factor, generally speaking, what we're then asking the industrial kind of certification bodies to do is have a decrease in scatter and an increase in confidence, and that will cost money. But it will also then highlight the opportunity, let's call it an opportunity now, where we can build understanding and we can build confidence in these combinations, because that's where in a knowledge exchange or a research and industrial collaboration, we can actually start to act as much bigger organization than a single R&D unit in a large prime, for example. So to deal with this in the future of AM, we have this materials for additive thing, which I'm going to start banging the drum on, because if we can have a deep understanding of the effect of processing of our material, which research is very good at discussing, but if we can try and align that better with what industry is looking at, that will have a huge impact. I think we can support industry in terms of closer links between simulation and reality. I think we have to share, we have to talk more, we have to talk more openly, we have to remove the barriers of competition and remove the barriers of funding if we possibly can, to allow a more open collaboration. And in turn, that should then allow us to have an increase in part confidence in the industrial sense. But we could also use advanced techniques to monitor and validate our parts in and post process. So to try and instigate some of this, I'd like to frame this materials for additive manufacturing is about where we link all aspects of the process chain. So we want to be able to understand what happens to our material and not necessarily why we need unobtainium to be processed via additive manufacturing process X or Y. What we're trying to do is promote an ability to rapidly develop, consider the economic impact of what our research is trying to do, the performance, the scalability, the environmental, mechanical performance, etc., etc. By no means am I suggesting everything needs to be reinventing. It's no surprise I've got people like John Barnes to come and talk today, because we don't necessarily need to make every new material from scratch. What we actually need to be able to do is share what we're able to do with what's currently available, and maybe more incrementally develop and share. So to frame that, simple questions like maybe, what if I use oversized powder in particle fusion? What would happen? What did you do, university or industry partner X, to combat residual stresses in large Taiwan parts? And if we start talking and we start sharing about our experience with these problems, then the solution will become evident quicker, and that then allows us to really push forward. And collectively, the audience, I'm assuming, combined AM experience is hundreds of years. So just with this audience today, and I think we probably have quite a few people missing from those who registered as well, so the collective AM experience is vast. So AM can win, the technology can win here if we start to share. The important question is, what do we need to share? So to try and instigate that, what I've done is I've created a Padlet page. So if you want to do it on your phone, feel free to scan the QR code. If you want to copy the link, I think Patrick maybe will be able to post the link in the chat for us. If you want to be silent in the background, please, by all means, comment on the Padlet. So when you load the Padlet screen, there is a little plus icon which just allows you to put a post-it note on that page. What we want to try and do is try and address one of these 3 questions, or all of the 3 questions, depending on where you sit. And what we're looking for is trying to get industry or academia to start talk about how do you work with your opposing sector in AM and why. I get the feeling it's maybe clearer in one direction than the other. Question 2 is then, is there a specific approach or a specific area which you normally would work in metal AM? Is it, for example, material and parameter development? Do you focus on post-processing, design focus, etc., etc.? And what's your thoughts on how can we add value to support the uptake of AM for your organization, for you and your role? And what we want to try and do here is we'll collate these responses via the Padlet or via the chat, whichever way you'd like to instigate. And I'm also hoping that we'll use this time to catch up a little bit on the time frame. So if we try and go for another 10 or so minutes, that would be fab. Nancy shared the link in the chat, so thank you, Nancy. So if we're in a position to please jump onto the link or scan the QR code and put something on Padlet, and I'd like to be able to build this up. Tomorrow at the start of the second session, we'll have a small session at the beginning, really just to reflect on some of these outputs. What I'd like to be able to do is start to use these to drumbeat some obvious research projects, not necessarily to take people's work away from them, but to try and get people matched together so that we can share. I appreciate this is probably a global audience today, and by all means that doesn't negate it from what we need to do, but I think in the UK specifically, there is absolutely a need for industry and academia to collaborate more openly on smaller scale projects, not just the big ticket stuff. So if you're in a position to start sharing, that would be great. If anyone would like to take the floor and let me know of any thoughts you've got, I'm very keen for people to talk in this session too, and rather than just being me. But the Padlet is there ready for people to add some comments on. Like I said, if you just press the plus, or I think you can just double click anywhere on the page, it'll give you an open box for you to comment or write in. And the floor is over and open for everybody else. Is there anyone who's interested in sharing an answer to any of or all of the questions via chat or by the wonders of their voice? That would be really interesting to hear. I'll make a start while I think I see a few people have dialed into the panel, which is great. I class myself as industrial academic, so I spent as much time or more time in industry than I have in academia, and I get quite frustrated with academia for researching things that I don't see as important today. And then as I become more understanding to the world of academia, I guess I then look at industry, wonder why they aren't looking for response. And I think I can try and see the problem in that budgets are small, despite the turnover of some of these industrial players. Budgets are small when it comes to exploration, because most industry sectors are in the business of making a product to try and make some money. They're not in the business of trying to build understanding and data. That's a fortunate position you find yourself in when you're relatively successful financially. So for me, I want to work with industry because I want to be able to help them with their problems, and quite selfishly that then puts me in a position where when that industrial partner wants students, I can help on that matchmaking front, which gives KPIs and kudos to university. It's quite selfish, but that's why I do it. It's about building that reputation and also addressing the problems in which the next throughput of AM engineers. Has anyone else got anything to share? A few bits popping up on the Padlet, which is great, so thank you for that. So please do feel free to carry on the Padlet. Anyone like to share?
I'll throw in some stuff here as well.
I was about to throw you under a bus, Alan, so thank you for that.
Were you? Okay. Well and truly squashed then. I think so. I've been in academia now for 20 years. I've been in industry in additive manufacturing for about 7 years before that. And the first 10 years at Lancaster has been around research, knowledge exchange, business engagement and things like that before becoming an academic member of staff. What I've found are the same frustrations that you described as well, but really it's sometimes the inability in academia to be agile and to be able to do things that industry want. They need to address a question straight away and to be able to try and come up with a solution, because it's about product out the door, it's about turnover generation and things like that. So it's maybe a question out to the industrialists here. How can we, and using your example with the Centre of Advanced Manufacturing, how can academia try to change the way it looks at engagement with business in that context? How do we become more agile and respond more quickly?
A postcard. I think the other factor here is that, and I purposefully used it, this add value. I think the word value is misunderstood or is misplaced. Value isn't necessarily just fiscal or economical value. Value needs to be about showing an opportunity for growth. And I think we've got certainly a couple of people in the US here today, and I think you look at AM Forward and some of those recent pushes. The American government is, I guess, forcing more collaboration. They're forcing value add in some way, shape, or form. How successful that is by force and how that trickles down to the small organisations is, I guess, to be seen. In the UK, we're not really forcing it, but there is quite a lot of funding available. Is funding, is that the simple answer? I put a poll on LinkedIn a few days ago, and it seemed to suggest that people were looking for funding. Is it really that simple, that if this is the strategy to go for, we need to be able to fund it, or is there other ways in which we can add value to support this AM uptake without necessarily needing to find someone to pull together a couple $100 million funding to fund international collaboration?
Just looking at the Padlet as well, Rob, question number one that's up there, it's reflecting on AMRC and locally to us at Lancaster, that'll be AMRC Northwest and their investment in additive as well. National Manufacturing Institute Scotland and also ourselves at the UK Design for Additive Manufacturing Network. And how do we make things simple and clear? I think we've got to look, certainly within the UK context, at things like the high value manufacturing catapult, which a number of these centres sit within. UK DfAM network doesn't. It's an EPSRC funded initiative, so it's got a finite life until there's an exit strategy and some sort of sustainable plan put in place to allow that to continue. But yeah, good questions around how do we make it clear, and really the catapults should be of some sort of responsibility there to be able to differentiate between capability, resource, sectoral needs, etc., etc.
Yeah, totally. So I think I had an interesting conversation with the MRC, which I'm sure they won't mind me saying, that they also they held their hands up that they're agile enough to work with the small projects, the what if questions, as I like to call them, that they are looking at the bigger picture, of course, which is great, but industry doesn't necessarily just want that. What industry needs to know is what's the experience of ALS i7, what's the optimum mechanical performance that you'd expect to gain, what's the best heat treatment profile to promote X, Y, or Z. That they need simple, relatively simple questions, I would say, answering, and they come with the low cost. So my thought, added value, is if I make a request for quite a considerable amount of consumables budget and I fund some students to answer some of those what ifs, the students benefit because they build up their learning. We have the data, not for IP purposes, but for allow us to be able to support that simple what if questions. If every university had a small pot that they could put towards simple question answering funding, would that promote growth in the UK? I'd like to think it certainly add a little bit of impetus to that. And I think when it comes to the primes, etc., it's really difficult to expect the primes all the RTOs and catapults to really add that impact from the start, because it's not driven from them to create the strategy, is it? Yeah, who owns the strategy? Maybe that's a separate conversation. Anybody else would like to share before we move on? I was going to give it another five minutes. By all means, please do carry on the Padlet. I'd really like this to be full to the brim if possible, and see what's happening and what people's thoughts are. I can't say that I'll be able to turn all of the thoughts and comments into reality, but I'd certainly like to give it a go at turning it into something which gives us an opportunity to look at collaborative opportunities. And I'll share any findings I find from this and any comments that I made. I'll share them on LinkedIn over the coming weeks to try and keep drumbeating the session. So, final call. Anyone have anything else to say before we potentially move on?
Again, reflecting back on the launch event of AM UK, which you were involved in as well, Rob, a couple of months ago, and is it their place maybe to try and coordinate some of these questions, link out to industry, bring academia in, and do some sort of coordination effort?
I think to an extent, yeah. So the AM UK, Additive Manufacturing UK, for those who don't know, are a trade association, and I say that early because they are a trade association that they're there to try and bring people together. They are trying to own the strategy of AM, but they're a trade association. They're a membership tool to try and help people connect. So unless they have a direct link into the government, I'm not sure that they're really the right people for the strategic side too. The high value manufacturing catapults do have a direct line into government in some way, shape or form. So for me, it should be the UKRI/government/high value catapult network who should be dictating the strategy. But equally, they can only dictate the strategy on behalf of their members, and we're in this constant field of membership, which I think does add significant complications to it. Maybe it's this network that needs to bring it together, because we can talk more agnostically away from the pressures of funding, and maybe we should come up with a strategy. Maybe that will be really clear from the Padlet, who knows. I think if I could ask for you to please do feel free to keep pushing the Padlet. I'd really like to see as much as possible flooded on there. Any thoughts, any comments, that would be of great interest. For many reasons. It's interesting to see what people are up to, but also I think it's really interesting to be able to have an opportunity to comment back on and see any of these things. If anyone on the Padlet has a couple of mentions about contacts, etc., do feel free to share your details on that if you don't want to be hidden away. It is relatively private unless you put your name on there and a link to your LinkedIn or etc. Please feel free to chip in and share. So we'll move past that section. So thank you for that. I wanted to try and instigate this conversation because I think it's important. I do think it will carry on. You may have seen the announcement for those in the UK audience about the TCT additive manufacturing user group type thing they're pulling together. I think it's very early days for that, but that could be a really good opportunity for these conversations to continue. So I would say for those in the UK or particularly interested in the UK direction, keep your eye on the TCT announcements, which have been trickling through the last day or so. I do think that will be one of the big methods in which we can start to have like I say, a more agnostic and relevant, I guess, throughput of ideas into something reality. Feel free to carry on in the Padlet. I will stop talking and I will hand over to Jimmy Campbell.